Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sree's daily global COVID-19 show. My name is Sree Sreenivasan, and it's my honor to convene this daily conversation around various aspects of COVID-19 and, of course, the US elections. Today is episode number 239 in 239 days, and we are speaking the day after the US elections. We're going to talk about Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, and so much more with our experts. Bob Anthony, my co-host, Mary C. Curtis, columnist at Roll Call based in North Carolina, and host of Equal Time with Mary C. Curtis. She's covered multiple presidential campaigns. We'll also be joined by Michael Wagner at ProWag, who is a political scientist, journalism professor, and part of the Elections Research Center at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Please follow them. Michael's at ProWag, Mary is at MC Curtis NC3, and Bob Anthony is at New York Bob. We'll be joined by our guests in just a minute. And there's Bob. Hi, Bob. Let me just do my promotion and come right back to you. So you've seen Bob already, and Mary's also standing by. We'll bring them on in just a second. We're live right now on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. I have in my hands here the New York Times from this morning. Turnout soars along with suspense as nation in tumult delivers verdict. And that was the big story today, of course, is where the election would turn and what would happen. We also saw the drama with President Trump at 2 or 3 in the morning when he went out and falsely claimed victory, as many people had feared he would. Today, he has been very active on Twitter, but has not been seen in the way one might have expected. We have a lot to talk about. First, let me reintroduce myself. I'm Sree. I'm the Marshall Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation at Stony Brook School of Journalism and the co-founder of Digimentors, a social, digital, and virtual events company. Our motto: don't cancel your physical event without talking to us. We'd love to help you with your virtual event. We've done events for 50 people and 100,000 people. We bet your event is somewhere in between those numbers. Here's our email address. Please get in touch if we can help you. And our show has been on the air for 239 days in a row. We've had more than 420 guests from 71 cities and 20 countries. Our archives are at youtube.com/Sreenet, and you can find us on Scroll.in and Scroll Global. And we are very grateful to our sponsors and to our producers, Rose Horowitz at Rose Horowitz 31 and Vandana Menon, Vandana_Menon. So glad to have them with me on this incredible ride that we've had for 239 days in a row. We're live right now on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and LinkedIn. Please tag your friends right now. They can join us live or watch later. Please post your questions. Please ask our guests anything you like. And please tell us where you're watching from as well. Just post in the comments and we will grab your questions and comments and share them with our audience. First, let me say hi to Bob, who was with me yesterday as we were trying to make sense of this election. We both gave our thoughts in case Trump wins or in case Biden wins. And right now it looks much more likely that Biden's going to win. It's still not over. Just as people had predicted, they'd said this would be perhaps an election week rather than an election day. So let me ask Bob, A, did he get any sleep? And B, how is he feeling today about the elections?
I'm feeling as ragged as you are. I mean, that was one heck of a night, punctuated by that middle of the night tirade by the person in charge. Yeah, it was just an exhausting day of following results coming in. So yeah, I do feel better today. I do feel better with the way things are being counted. Never mind who's leading. I just feel better about the process. It seems to be moving ahead, and logically so. Never mind the calls for stopping counting or things like that. So I didn't get enough sleep, but I'm doing okay.
Terrific. We'll bring on Mary Curtis in just a minute, our political expert and commentator and journalist and podcast host. One thing that I do want to say is that many of us who were expecting a repudiation of the way Trump has handled the coronavirus were very disappointed to see that millions of people believed the lies that he told, that the virus is almost over, that the way he's handled it has been excellent, et cetera, et cetera. And that really hurts me because I feel like the part of America that cares about science wasn't as high as we thought perhaps it was.
That's exactly my feelings. I've been talking to friends really across the country. Some one on the West Coast, a few in Wisconsin, and a bunch here in New York. We all can't believe how part of this nation has absorbed the tripe that he's basically laid out. The lies, the misinformation, the misdirection. Terribly disappointing. Terribly disappointing.
And so painful to watch and see. The good news is that if you have a Biden presidency, there will be a different emphasis on the science and the health. And I believe that Fauci will not get fired, and we will see a different trajectory. Doesn't mean that problems will be solved. There's still 10, 12 weeks of Mr. Trump left, and he can inflict lots of damage. But let's get to our political expert. Mary C. Curtis is with us. We're just delighted. She's making her third or fourth appearance on this show, and we're very grateful to her. Hi, Mary.
Hi, fourth. Let me screen there.
Yeah.
What day is
How
it?
are you, Mary? You're in
Hi,
North
good
Carolina?
to see you.
Yeah,
I am in North Carolina where they are still counting the absentee ballots and mail-in ballots. They have until November 12th, which is very interesting. But I see what's going on, and I am optimistic in some ways. But with a Republican-controlled Senate, that Mitch McConnell, we saw him obstruct so much of President Barack Obama's agenda. And you can see him trying to obstruct so many things that I'm sure that a Biden Harris administration would like to do if they had a democratically controlled Senate. So as you say, maybe I'm a little bit of a pessimist, but I see that. And it is disheartening to see President Trump now, and he and his team have just put in so many lawsuits in so many of these states. And you can see it's very bald and bold that in states like Arizona and Nevada, where they're behind, they want to count every vote. In other states where they're leading, like Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and now even Georgia, they want to stop the counting just when they are counting so many of the minority cities, Detroit, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Atlanta. And who are the people that they want to disenfranchise? I would like to see what the other Republicans, how they are going to react to this tactic where he wants to throw it into the courts. And he very much said, I wanted to put on Justice Amy Coney Barrett because I want the court to decide who is the president. So I think there's still a lot of waiting and watching. But as both of you have said, we have a president who, more than 230,000 Americans have died of COVID. He says we're rounding the corner. Well, unless around the corner there's something crazy or bad. The economy is working for some, but there's so many. We saw since May, more than 8 million people, I believe, including many minorities and children, have fallen into poverty. I had the Reverend William Barber on my last episode of the podcast, and he spoke so eloquently about this. And then we have the movement for racial justice. And we see a president who has poured salt into that wound, who has given comfort to many white supremacists, talk about the Proud Boys. He has cheered a group in Texas who tried to apparently run a Biden-Harris bus off the road, and the FBI is investigating. And he said, he loves them. So I do think no matter what happens, we do have a divided country. President Barack Obama, when he was a senator, said very famously, there's no red America or blue. It is a United States of America. Well, I do think that President Joe Biden has his work cut out for him to bring people together, because we've seen so many people who do love this president. We saw him leave many of his followers out in the cold in Omaha. Some of them had to go to the hospital. And I bet you those people still voted for him.
Well, he told us, right, that he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and he wouldn't lose a single voter. And he, in fact, could help kill 150,000 extra people than might otherwise have died and still not lose voters. It's incredible. We have a lot of questions coming in, and I want to get to as many of them as I can. And I know Bob will also want to ask you some questions. But first, I want to just start by just acknowledging kind of the historical moment we're at. If in fact Biden pulls this off, we will have a African-American woman as our vice president, who's also half South Asian. It's an incredible moment. Just looking at the three of us here, for the three of us, it's not important just for the three of us, but for this entire country. Talk about that, please, Mary, a little bit, and I'd like to hear from Bob as well.
Well, it is a great moment. She's historic in many ways. A woman, African-American, Asian-American, went to an HBCU, elected a senator, only the second, I believe, African-American U.S. senator, attorney general, so accomplished, really distinguished herself in those hearings with the Attorney General Barr and others. But yet, she is having to walk an incredible tightrope, criticized as many women of color and Black women are. Are you stern, but you have to be assertive, but not angry? Are you having too much joy? Are you dancing at your rallies? And then I wrote a column actually in Roll Call about how Senator David Perdue of Georgia mispronounced her name and made fun of it and mocked it. And every person of color, immigrant who used nicknames could really feel that othering, which was so much a part of the appeal. Now, you can attack somebody's policies or criticize them, but when you attack them as a human being and their right to be in this country, that is so divisive. So she is really stepping into, I really, like I said, I criticize some of her policies, but you have to say this woman is tough and she is going to be scrutinized in every way. That said, what an achievement. What an achievement. I mean, I'm just feeling it as a Black woman in a year where I saw no police officers indicted for the killing of Breonna Taylor, which I have to say broke me, even though I wasn't expecting anything different. To see this person rise in this, it would be the first woman who got to this. Listen, we've had people on the ticket, they didn't make it. And it is something. And for young people to see that, I can imagine young women of color, just seeing this example. And it's really quite moving. But, there's a little thing in my head that says, also, were they some people who didn't vote for Biden because they didn't like that image? And there'll be people, just as people resented Barack Obama in the White House, there will be people who, what did Trump say? He said, he called her a monster. That was unforgivable, disrespectful, this person who's accomplished so much. But she's tough and she can really, I think she's ready for it. She's the person who can take all of this and she's unflappable. I wrote a piece in the Neiman Reports. I was a Neiman Fellow at Harvard that just came out about Black women and how they're either invisible or stereotyped in some way. And I think the media and the world still has not quite gotten the fullness of our experience, both our strength and our vulnerabilities. And I think that, she will be on the world stage. What can I say, Sree?
What a moment. Bob, over to you.
Yeah. What I find interesting, and you made a good point, this isn't the first time a woman has run for vice president. There was Geraldine Ferraro and there was Sarah Palin. And, one had Geraldine had her flaws, some having to do with her family. Sarah Palin, we frankly don't have the amount of time in the show to describe how unqualified she was. And but unlike the previous two, and you can, if you have a different opinion, let me know. It doesn't seem like there was an attempt to repackage Kamala as the Democrats tried to repackage Geraldine, and the way the Republicans tried to dress up and repackage Sarah Palin to fit into whatever narrative they thought would be good for the election. I think the Kamala that we're seeing now is the one that people know, not something that the Democratic Party has packaged for us. Is that what you've seen?
Yes, and I think this is a little bit of a test for the media to make sure in the coverage they don't fall into some of those traps and those tropes. And that's when it also helps to have a very diverse, as you know, newsrooms. Not that it's really just up to us to check people, but yeah, she is, you know, she bobs up there in her Chuck Taylors, and she is a striking, she is, I think, in a sense, Trump goes after a little bit because he realizes this is a person with a great charisma. He recognizes star quality.
And one of the things that she had to overcome, and the Biden-Harris ticket, that people on the right are calling her the most liberal senator in history and all of that, where people on some progressives were criticizing her for being a former police, or, you know, former prosecutor, and therefore, scrutinizing everything she'd ever done. And to overcome both of those, because it's very rare that somebody is labeled both of those, you know, if both of those things are held against you, how can a one person be both of those things at the same time? I think that's been part of the surreal part of this election. And if they pull this out, I think the historic nature of this just cannot be overemphasized. And we've talked also how misogyny played a role in 2016, not the only role, but a role, and that we are now over that here because she has met the vice presidential test to be one heartbeat away from the presidency. And I know she will be a great vice president, and if everything goes well, one day get to run as the leader of the party. I mean, this is what she will inherit whenever the next time she runs. We can't imagine that Joe Biden will be running a second term. I don't know if there was some talk early about him talking about that. I may have missed that. I don't know if he ever addressed that, whether he would.
That came up in the debates, Sree. They asked both candidates about what would happen if they're in the vice presidential debate. They asked both candidates what might happen if their president couldn't continue, or came up short of the term. Neither answered the question. So neither wanted to talk about it publicly, but I'm sure they've that's a conversation I'm sure they had. And sure. If Joe didn't think she was ready to step in, she would not have been on the table at all.
And this is also, again, where you compare, one of the things we've heard time and time again from Black folks in this country: you have to be not just as good as a white person, you have to be better. You have to be twice as good in order to be able to get jobs that white people get. And you look at her qualifications and what she's done and where she's reached, compare them to a lot of other vice presidential candidates in history. It's really stark difference, and that it's all part of what we've been talking about. Let's just get some of the comments in, because so many people are watching. Jonathan's watching from the East Village, which is still reeling from a police demonstrator clash in Washington Square. I did not see this news, Bob. I don't know if you caught it.
I caught a little bit of the video. Yeah, I'm sure he heard it where he is. They went down Fifth Avenue to Washington Square, and there's a lot of people there tonight. But I'll let you keep going. Yeah,
and Jonathan's watched 239 episodes in a row. So thank you, Jonathan, as always. Rajan is watching from Long Island. So is Linda. Charles and Mary are watching from New Jersey. Former guest Charlie Cunnan Carroll, thank you so much for being here. Marilyn, former guest from Staten Island. We call her the Queen of Staten Island, and she's watching. Rajan says, saddened though not very surprised that Zeldin is ahead of Nancy Goroff in New York 01. So there's a very specific race that Rahajan is paying attention to. And Rahajan says, angry that McConnell will have a 7th term in the Senate. I am obviously unhappy about that, but much worse that looks like he will be the senator, the Senate Majority Leader again. And did you see the audacity he had of invoking MLK in his acceptance speech, where he said that he was moved or something like that by the dreams of MLK? I just couldn't believe it. He said he was inspired by the March on Washington. Mary, your thoughts?
MLK's daughter brought him up short with that. I don't know if you saw that. MLK's daughter, yes, said, no, this is not my father's dream.
Exactly.
This is a Senate Majority Leader who has had a update of the Voting Rights Act after the Supreme Court gutted it in the Shelby decision. The House passed it, and it's been on his desk for months, for a long, long time. And he hasn't done anything about it. He's had the act to give more stimulus, more money to people who are suffering, has not acted on it. So that hardly is MLK's dream. But Mitch McConnell is nothing if not shameless.
Yeah, that is certainly true. Neil said,
me as well. I mean, next door from me in South Carolina, Jamie Harrison ran such a great race, and Lindsey Graham really, he hasn't had town hall in South Carolina for years. And his ads pretty much were Jamie Harris, running a picture of him with Nancy Pelosi saying this guy is too far left, where Jamie had a plan for the people of South Carolina. But I never believed the polls because it's South Carolina and it is very red. And I just never believed that they would go for him. But he was an amazing candidate, and I don't think we've seen the last of him. But that's some of those Senate races, people reflexively. I mean, look in was it Florida? They approved a $15 minimum wage, but yet voted against the candidates who were for that. So in many ways, it's almost a reflexively pulling that R, and it doesn't have to do with policies. And so as one
point that was made about Florida that we could just reflect on for a moment, somebody pointed out that the racism we or the kind of the favoring of the status quo and the ignorance that we ascribe to certain kinds of white men in this country, we are seeing perhaps that there are other groups that also may buy into some of that, in the way in which we saw more people voting, more Latinos supporting Trump than before, after all of this, for example. And how do you both think? What do you both think about that?
Trump has done a lot to enable people to follow him. That's the way I look at it. I had a discussion with a friend of mine today. People who stand on the fringes and are afraid to get involved because they, under normal times, they would not be accepted by polite society, feel free to come out in the open, because Trump has basically let the door open and let them know that they can move unobstructed. The misogynists, the Jews will not replace us types, and the folks who think that Black Lives Matter is some far left radical wing of something, he enables that. This country will stay divided, but I think without the enabling factor, we might get, I don't know, some type of relief.
Okay, let's keep going with some of the comments here. Neil on our team is watching and says hello from Springfield, Virginia. And folks, please keep sending in your comments. Neil says he's angry that the GOP will likely keep their Senate majority unless the Democrats pick up both Georgia Senate seats. That's going to be the most watched state in history when there are two Senate seats that are going to be happening at the same time. Mary, do you think there is a chance that they will pick up one or two of those seats, the Democrats?
We'll see. I mean, John Ossoff destroyed David Perdue in the debate when he said you aren't really working for the people of Georgia. And so much so that David Perdue canceled he did not show up for their next debate, and said he went to a Trump rally, and yet he's ahead. As I said, sometimes it is very frustrating I was very saddened that Doug Jones in Alabama, he's a man who, prosecuted the bombers in the Birmingham church bombing, finally got some justice. And Tuberville, who beat him, was asked about the Voting Rights Act and what his feelings were about it. And it was clear from his answer that he didn't exactly know what they were talking about. And yet, this is where we are.
Yeah. I just want to point out the contrast on the screen here. It says we're looking at Mary's column. By the way, please check out our website, maryccurtis.com. And this was the article she mentioned in the Neiman publication. It's time to cover Black women as the norm and not the other. And then Riaz, who's watching in Canada and is supporting he was worrying, he said yesterday, about how America turns out. Riaz says, can someone comment on Trump's increased support from Black women? Mary?
It was a few more points, although overwhelmingly Black women did vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But Trump did improve in every little points, from white women, Black men, Latino. I hate to use that term in a sense because Cuban Americans in Florida are very different from Mexican Americans in Arizona, who seem to help Joe Biden out a lot. But he did, white men, he lost a few points on. So I still think it was overwhelming, but everybody's an individual. And I think there was a gender gap there. And some minority men are drawn in some ways. They have said to his toughness in a sense, but I think that's very performative because Trump does not really, he says he's a strong guy and a tough guy, but he doesn't like to be asked. He walked off on Leslie Stahl asking him just pro forma questions on 60 Minutes. That's not very. So the toughness is performative to me. It's not real.
Sure.
But it seems to appeal to some folks. I don't know exactly why.
Let's keep going. We have lots of comments coming in. Mark is watching from Durham, North Carolina. And Rahajan says the number of COVID cases will reach 300,000 by 2020. And Mark is saying North Carolina is still in play, and surprisingly, Republicans gained control of the State House and several other offices. He was hoping we were going to have an East Asian as treasurer. Mark also says some folks have been asking whether there was enough mobilization of growing Asian community in North Carolina. So lots of things to think about. And Rahajan says, I will honestly not be surprised if Senator Harris becomes the first female president. Many other countries have had female leaders. We're behind in that respect. Paula is watching from Tallahassee. And Mark says, were you disappointed by segments of Latino culture as well as young people? You addressed that a little bit, Mary, but you can talk, both of you can talk about that, and then we'll bring our other guest on as well. Mary, about Latinos and young people. I haven't looked at the numbers of young people.
More young people voted. It is interesting. There was increased turnout, and Donald Trump did increase his vote total, but Joe Biden is still going to win the popular vote by, I think the last I saw, at least about 3 million. And he got more votes than I think anyone he got a lot of votes. So more people were engaged. But when people talk about young people will save us, and you do see some activism, particularly around climate change and gun safety with young people. But let's face it, there were a lot of young faces at the Unite the Right rally that you alluded to, Sree, holding those tiki torches. And, you know, the young man who drove in Texas all the way down to El Paso to kill all those folks. And he had his little manifesto about Mexican Americans and invasions, parroting some of the language of our leaders. So young people still have to be educated and to educate themselves and really learn the history of this country and how much everyone has played a part in building it. So I don't think we can depend on that. And as I said, Latinos, I think the coverage of Latinos will change a bit because people put them in that category, but people from Cuba or Venezuela or Central America or Puerto Rico or Mexican descent are all different. And then within those communities, there is racism, there's color lines, there's all kinds of things. And Trump did work in Florida and talked about entrepreneurship. And he put out this, I think, lie about Joe Biden would be a socialist. And well, we saw that some of that worked.
Yeah. Folks, we're going to now bring on our other guest who's joining us. Let's remind everyone what we're doing here. It's the day after, and it's episode 239 of our daily global show where we focus on the pandemic. And now we're talking, obviously, about the elections. We're very grateful to have a very timely guest, not a timely and geographically appropriate guest. Michael Wagner is joining us. We're talking to Mary C. Curtis and Bob Anthony. Michael is at ProWag on Twitter. Mary is at MC Curtis NC3, and Bob is at New York Bob. And Michael's a political scientist, journalism professor, and faculty affiliate at the Elections Research Center at the University of Wisconsin, in Madison. So UW Madison in the house and Wisconsin in the house. So please welcome onto our stage our new friend, Michael Wagner. Hi, Michael.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
Thank you. I know you've spent an entire day talking to journalists. You just got off the phone with a reporter yourself. Please give us a state of play with Wisconsin and what you learned today and all that went down, please.
Well, Wisconsin went for Joe Biden. All the votes in Wisconsin have been counted, and Biden has a 20,000 plus vote advantage. He really overperformed Hillary Clinton's totals in 2016 in Dane County, where Madison is, especially, but also a little bit in Milwaukee County, and then narrowed some gaps in some of the smaller mid-sized cities around the state as well. Early in the day, it seemed like the Trump campaign was saying they were going to demand a recount in Wisconsin. Wisconsin state law says that if the vote is within 1%, any candidate on the ballot can call for a recount. We've had a couple of recounts before in our state. They've never changed more than a few hundred votes. And again, there would need to be a 20,000 vote change, or at least half of that to affect the result of the election. So it doesn't seem likely. The Trump campaign would have to pay for the recount, which would probably cost $3-4 million. And so it seems like wasted money. And so I think there is some question tonight as to whether the Trump campaign will actually move forward with that push.
Well, thank you. And I'm sure, Mike, both Bob and Mary will have some questions for you as well. What changed this time between the two, 2016 and this election? The Wisconsin, Michigan, both went to Trump in 2016, and both have gone to Biden this time. Can you talk about that a little bit? And then I'll see if Mary has a question for you as well.
Sure. Well, I think part of the answer is that Joe Biden is a man. I think that clearly Hillary Clinton suffered from some hostile sexism in the 2016 campaign, and there's evidence that influenced the vote a bit. Biden also paid more attention to Wisconsin in terms of visits than Hillary Clinton did in the general election in 2016. The Democratic National Committee was going to hold their convention in Wisconsin until the pandemic hit, and they ended up doing it virtually instead. But there were several visits from the Biden campaign to the state. They spent a lot of time here. They got a new party chair who was incredibly creative with fundraising. You might have seen online and on social media the cast of The Princess Bride getting together and reading the script of the movie. The former cast of Happy Days getting together. These were all things the Wisconsin.
Where was I missed both of these. I can't believe it.
They were lots of fun. They were lots of fun, and you could. And then the price of admission was to give some money to the Wisconsin Democratic Party, and so they did a great job raising money in that way, and really turned out the vote where they needed to win in a intensely polarized and competitive state.
To all the young people watching who have no idea what we're talking about, and they all know Princess Bride, I'm sure, because parents make them watch. But Happy Days was one of my favorite shows growing up, and it's set in Milwaukee.
That's right, set in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
That's right. And then Laverne and Shirley, a spin-off show, was also in Milwaukee. Right. Let's go to Mary and then to Bob. By the way, Bob has spent a lot of time in Wisconsin, so he's our ringer here tonight. He's going to ask us great questions.
Briefly, before you get into it, I do want to say my website is maryccurtis.com, but my Twitter is @mcurtisnc3, no extra C. I did want to ask you, I heard that they were suing about some of the votes. It seems like in states where the votes are coming from the cities, like Milwaukee or Detroit or different things, Do you know the state of what's going on with that, with the count of the vote, and if they've sort of given up on that?
It's not clear that they've given up, but it's clear that they would have a pretty long row to hoe to make a good case. The counting of the ballots proceeded exactly as planned. Before Election Day, the Wisconsin Election Commission said, because by state law we can't count the early ballots until Election Day in Wisconsin, it'll probably be late in the middle of the night, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, when the Milwaukee ballots come in. Milwaukee, they said, was particularly different because those early ballots that were mailed in aren't counted at the wards, but are counted in a centralized location, which slows it down even more. And that's exactly what happened. Those numbers came in just when the Wisconsin Election Commission said it would. Not surprisingly, those were overwhelmingly votes in favor of Joe Biden, given where they were cast. And the Trump campaign and others have been spreading conspiracy theories online about that all day. But these were normal votes. It was a chaotic campaign and a normal counting of votes, and there's no reason at all to believe that anything nefarious was happening in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I heard some of that. I was on a show with someone who called it a vote dump. So they were trying to, I say that conspiracy language. And I also asked, on the ground, so much has been polarized, where you had people showing up at polling places to be poll watchers with weapons. We had somebody in North Carolina was arrested. What do you see in Wisconsin as far as on the ground? What do you hear? Is there that level of polarization? And you also, obviously you've had your police demonstrations and confrontations. So could you tell me a little bit about it's the home of Kenosha, pull on that string a little bit on just what the mood is?
Yeah, it's been changing a bit, and it was changing it in a direction that was favoring the Trump campaign. I'm sure you know and recall that after Kenosha happened and the protests in Wisconsin intensified. They had started months before, after the murder of George Floyd. In Madison, statues around the Capitol were pulled down and dragged to a lake. There had been lots and lots of protests all across the state. And during the summertime and the early fall, the polling in the state suggested that Wisconsinites were sympathetic to the Black Lives Matter movement and to the protests. And after Kenosha, those numbers started to soften. And Trump jumped in with the kind of law and order tweets and campaign style and used that rhetoric when visiting Wisconsin and when visiting Kenosha. And there was a little bit of a softening there. In terms of Election Day voting, there really haven't been reports in Wisconsin that I've seen that suggest the kind of intimidation you were talking about having reported about. So it seemed to have been a smoother day in Wisconsin after a horrific primary back in April, right when the pandemic first hit, and most of the precincts in Milwaukee didn't have any workers, so they only had 5 places to vote in person in April for the state's largest city. They completely rectified that and fixed that problem in the general election, and had plenty of places open, and the lines were short, and voting tended to move fairly smoothly in our state this time.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Let's go to our other friend with the Wisconsin connection here. Bob, your thoughts or question?
Well, first of all, good to see you, Mike.
You too.
I'm glad we have somebody from Wisconsin to delve so deep into what happened. Just by way of background, I spent 2 years at the journalism school at UW-Madison, and I ended up as a reporter for the Milwaukee Sentinel for 7 years. And
that's great. I'm a professor in that school, so I'm sure I know people you worked with while you were there.
Is Diamond Jim Buffman still there?
Jim passed away a couple years ago. He was my office neighbor and my across the street neighbor. We were very close friends. And
I did not know that.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. He was a terrific. He was the dean of the J School for a while.
He was our director for many years, and was kind of the senior person in the department who would bring faculty back in line when we got too far away from the things that Jim thought we needed to be thinking about when educating our students about how to report the verifiable truth to an audience.
Every journalism school needs somebody or many somebodies like that.
And
we miss it.
He was the one who encouraged me, and I wasn't going to do it. He encouraged me to act on a posting that was on the wall for an internship at the Racine Journal-Times. And I ended up taking it, and I clocked that as the beginning of my journalism career. So I spent the summer at the Racine Journal-Times, and then later at the Milwaukee Sentinel. I was the Racine Kenosha Bureau, and that's what I want to ask you about. Recently, Foxconn had promised the regen. Foxconn is the company that makes Apple iPads and a lot of other electronic gear.
Right.
They had promised thousands of jobs. Trump had come to the state and said that he is turning around the Wisconsin economy. And basically, other than, I believe, a pretty much vacant building in downtown Milwaukee and a few others, and maybe some landscaping in Racine County, there's not much there. And I thought myself there'd be some pushback for promises broken, but apparently that's not what you saw. I guess the Kenosha shooting galvanized just the opposite. It just got people more hardened for the law and order as opposed to the George Floyd type of supporter.
Yeah, I think Foxconn really mattered in the 2018 governor's race, where the incumbent governor, Scott Walker, lost in another similarly narrow race to our now Democratic governor, Tony Evers. And there, Foxconn was a little bit bigger of a deal. Walker had bragged about Foxconn, had promised to bring hundreds of thousands of new jobs to the state over the course of his governorship, which didn't come to fruition. The Foxconn deal was a kind of a tax giveaway to the company. Dozens of families lost their homes through eminent domain for a factory that doesn't really exist and for jobs that have not come to fruition. When we asked in a survey of Wisconsinites right before the election if they thought that Foxconn would ever be worth it in terms of the tax giveaways, a strong majority of people in the state said that they did not think it would be worth it. And it seemed to be a bit of a bigger deal in the governor's race. And even though President Trump had tried to kind of make some hay about Foxconn and came, I think, for the groundbreaking even back when that happened a while ago. He really didn't get stuck with it in the way that Governor Walker did in his race. I think could be that people saw it as more of a local issue. I think the pandemic had something to do with it. The killing in Kenosha or the shooting, I guess, in Kenosha. And then later, I guess, the protests, there were killings in the protests that came afterwards. Those things, I think, might have taken more of a center stage in people's minds. But people, when we talk to them, especially in qualitative interviewing we're doing around the state, they think it's a waste. They don't see the benefit as being likely to come to them.
And just
I'll go on.
Is Racine in Kenosha County essentially the same as I remember it? Sort of a old blue collar, old style blue collar communities. I know we want to move on, but is it how I remember it?
It is, and they were aching out for these jobs and wanted them and worked hard to try to persuade Foxconn to come there, and the jobs aren't coming.
I was just going to ask you about the pandemic, which you mentioned. I understand Wisconsin is going by terrible spikes right now, and just the infection levels are over 20 some percent. How are you doing?
It's a challenge. It's rough. We're teaching online rather than seeing students in person, which is just a drag to not be able to be in the classroom with folks. And we're breaking records every day in the state with the number of new infections and deaths. And you would think that several months into this we would stop breaking records. And part of the problem is when the governor institutes a statewide mask mandate, or when the governor had a safer at home initiative, the state assembly and state senate sued the governor and got those things removed. And the Tavern League, which is a very powerful interest group in the state, has also been pushing to let people come to bars, and these are both, related to why we're having such a spreading of COVID-19 is, people are going to bars, you aren't wearing a mask when you're drinking, and you're probably not making great decisions about health when you're drinking either. And so those things combined with the pulling back of the governor trying to take executive action to help keep the state safe from the pandemic have caused some problems here.
We just had our Democratic governor, Roy Cooper, win pretty handily where the other races were tight in North Carolina, in large part, I think, because he was pretty strict on the COVID. And we still have problems, but people, particularly in the cities, really hewed to that mandate, and the infection rates have been much better.
That's how we were in the beginning, and the state legislature pushed to stop the behaviors that we were doing that were working. And the longer people do this, the harder it gets to do it. I think it's just people get more relaxed and lax about taking precautions, and yeah, it's not a great environment right now in terms of the pandemic here.
Can we talk a little bit about Congress and what happened in Wisconsin with the congressional races?
Yeah, nothing terribly surprising in Wisconsin in terms of the congressional races. We had Mark Pocan won handily in District 2, which is where Madison is. Ron Kind, I think probably the most dramatic race, Democrat in the kind of the western part of Wisconsin, won a narrow victory, but Tom Tiffany held on to his seat in the northern part of the state. Mike Gallagher held on to his seat in the northeast. Glenn Grothman in kind of the Fox Valley area. Brian Stile won in southeastern Wisconsin, and the former majority leader in the state Senate, Scott Fitzgerald, a Republican, won his race as well. And then, of course, Gwen Moore, the Democratic representative in Milwaukee, won handily as expected. So the three Democrats all held onto their seats, and the other Republicans across the state all held on to theirs, or won for the first time, but in an expected fashion. So, and there were no Senate races in Wisconsin this year, so that was the action.
Folks, we have about 15 minutes left, and we know you have questions. I'm going to ask Bob to keep his eye on his portal machine that he has to see if there's any breaking news that comes through while all of this is going on. By the way, if you watch Fox, as I did, you'd be convinced that Nevada and Arizona are both going to go to Donald Trump today and between today and tomorrow. And they also kept calling it a dump. The results released tonight, it was just kind of striking when you know where you're getting your media diet really affects. You hear four people who understand journalism. I'd love to hear each of you kind of grade the role that journalism played and how journalists did. Of course, there isn't a media, but it'd be interesting to hear from each of you. Mary, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Bob, and then Mike.
Well, I think I am always a media critic, but I do think they did some better than 2016. Trump knows how to grab the headlines, and he likes to be in them. So it was good when so many journalists were talking about voter fraud and mail-in ballot fraud. They would always say which is false or which there is no proof. And then when the president declared victory, they all would say, and which he cannot do, which is not legal and it's not binding. Whereas in the past, you might have seen he declares victory, Biden says that's the reaction. Biden says that's not the case, or he disagrees with them. They are really doing a lot more fact checking. Not that I'm sure it matters, as I said, because people do get their news from, as you said, 3 different silos, and they're going to have different sets of facts. So they will just tell you to your face, I don't believe you. And we do have going into the Congress someone who is a QAnon conspiracy theorist adherent, and the GOP did support her. So, but at the same time, I do think the media did a better job of reflecting truth instead of on the one hand, on the other hand. But we can do better. And we can do better than that, because and Trump is a master at grabbing those headlines and framing the stories. And I believe that we always can fact check everything from Democrats and Republicans.
Sure, I agree with you. I think people handled the midnight, the 2 a.m. press conference much better. But here's the AJC, I think, did a terrible job by saying, I have won, and then Biden saying it's not over. It sounds kind of like Biden's a bad loser. If you remember, that's part of the story of what happened with Al Gore and George W. Bush. Bush's cousin is at the Fox decision desk, by the way, which did an amazing job this time. And so basically, Gore basically was portrayed as pulling back his concession, and therefore as a sore loser and fight. The framing really matters. I'm looking at the comments in response to this headline. Someone says, here's the headline you were looking for. The president just announced a coup. Someone else saying this is irresponsible. This makes it sound like it's Biden who's trying to win by hook or by crook. And I think that's an important point. So thank you.
That's a terrible headline. That's just awful. I mean, really.
And the AJC is a great paper. So, maybe at 2 a.m. they weren't thinking right. Who knows? Let's go to Bob, your thoughts.
I was actually going to echo some of the same thoughts as you, Mary, in terms of how journalists covered it last night, especially Trump's little tirade in the morning. Terry Moran is one of the journalists I think of when I'm thinking of someone who gets angry on air and starts getting really decisive with his words. But after Trump got off the air, he said that this is the theater of authoritarianism. And this is a measured reporter. This is not a person I've never known to blow out like that after anybody's comments, but it actually was the right comment for the moment, because there was no facts in what Trump was saying at that moment. There was nothing to back up what he said about this being a fraud. And as I said last night, sometimes when you look out the window and it's snowing, and one person says it's snowing and the other person says it's not, you don't just report what each person said. You say, you're wrong, it's snowing. And that type of coverage I saw more of in the overnight hours. Even Chris Christie, former governor of New Jersey, former Republican governor of New Jersey, was astounded by some of Trump's calls for pausing the reading of the votes and other things. So even he, Trump supporter in the past, was flabbergasted. And in his role as a reporter, as a journalist last night, that was actually good reporting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Trump
Mary,
tweeted at one point, I hereby claim the states of Arizona, Georgia, and a journalist I heard on the TV say, it doesn't make it official if you say.
That reminded me of, for those of you, anybody fan of The Office, where Michael Scott is told that you should declare bankruptcy. So he just stands up and shouts, I declare bankruptcy, because he thinks that's how it works. And the fact that we can joke around about this tells you that, first of all, what a situation we're in, and that we have to laugh a little bit, otherwise we'd be crying given the state of affairs in this world. Let's go to Mike for his thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with what Mary and Bob were saying at the outset. I'll say that during the campaign, the news media gave more attention to Donald Trump than they did to Joe Biden. You could argue that, well, Trump's the president, so it's easier to make news as the president than just as a candidate. But that same thing was true in 2016 when he was not the president. And so, as Mary was saying, President Trump is very good at commanding attention. And it's not even really that people believe him when he talks. It's that if you're listening to him, you're not hearing from the other people running for president. And so the attention economy is important. And I think there's an area where the news media really could have done much better. In terms of election night and today, I totally agree that I think things have been much better. And so I won't repeat what's already been said. I'll add that one thing I think has been terrific has been how reporters, especially on television, have been doing something that you're taught not to do in the news, which is repeat things. Like, we tell students, right, we don't report the olds, we report the news. We want to focus on what's new. But one thing that's worth repeating, and John King did this to the point where Anderson Cooper said, I hope people at home don't have a drinking game where they take a drink when John says that we count every vote. But John King said over and over all morning, we count every ballot, we count every vote. You can't decide, no one can decide to stop counting and claim a victory. Some of these counts are going to favor one side, some are going to favor the other side, but we count every vote, and that is what we do. And repeating that is good for us because it was a chaotic campaign, but it's a normal counting of votes. This is how it works. It's working in the way it was designed, and it's important to report that and repeat it. And I think journalists have done a good job of that.
Yeah.
Sure. We only have a few minutes left. I want to show some comments. Go ahead, please.
I was going to say, I agree with you, Mike, in some of the campaign reporting. I mean, some of the framing, I went nuts every time they would repeat when Trump would say Joe Biden is in his basement, because it was just an image that wasn't true. And smaller rallies because of COVID. And, I went to some rallies. I went to a Jill Biden one where people were in cars and you took your temperature, and it was just different. And the Trump rallies were huge, but they were dangerous. A local reporter got infected with COVID. And so, I do think sometimes we should not take the framing.
I think that's right. I mean, 700 Trump supporters, according to a Stanford study, caught COVID and died at rallies because of the COVID they caught it at Trump rallies. That's flabbergasting.
And he wouldn't lose a single vote because of that. By the way, here it is. You may be seeing it for the first time. BuildBackBetter.com, the new Biden-Harris transition website. They just launched it tonight. It doesn't say that they are definitely winning. They say the people will determine who will serve as the next president, but this is the place where we can watch. It's called BuildBackBetter.com. I also wanted to just read a couple of the comments and questions, and then we'll wrap it up because it is late here, and we had very little sleep yesterday. Let's look at some of the questions that have come in, or comments. Jack says, this presidential race gives a fascinating insight into the American psyche. This really is a turning point in the American story. I think that's right to some extent because it's so close and because the Senate hasn't been handed over and some congressional seats were reduced in the Democratic side. I think it's going to be much harder for a lot of changes, but I am very hopeful about the pandemic being improved. Mark says, Trump reminds me a lot of P.T. Barnum. Rajan says, thank every deity in the pantheon that we don't have hanging chads. For all of Florida's problems, they did a pretty good job of counting. I wasn't happy with the results, but they counted it fast and accurately, and those horrific scenes from 2000 were not around. Let's look at some of the other comments. Aparna says, I've been trying to stay off social for sane chunks of time today, but glad to catch a snippet of this convening. Thank you very much. And everyone, please tag your friends. They can watch this later. Ellen says, the one thing Trump has done well from the beginning, his beginning, is that he is a salesman. He's selling himself, and he's done a great job. Look how many people voted for him and continue to support him. Sad is her comment here. Let's look at a couple more things. Jonathan's interesting program, which I listened to while the sound of helicopters droned in the background. He's in the East Village in New York, and I will, after this is over, go back and look at some of this information. Laurie White says, yes, Bob, about snow. Truth, not neutral, as Christian Amanpour says. And in fact, Laurie, who's been a guest on this show before and will be a guest next Tuesday, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, has a question for each of you. What books are your guests reading that would help explain what's going on in America today? So even if you're not reading at this moment, no one has time to read books, perhaps, but what would you recommend for people to read to understand this moment? And why don't we go to each of you with also kind of a final thought around this? Any other thoughts you'd like to share? So a book and a final thought. We'll start with Mike.
So I just happened to have this on my desk. I didn't know you were going to ask, but Alyssa Richardson has written a great book called Bearing Witness While Black. It's a marvelous
Hold on,
book.
You got to hold that up again, and then you've got to, hold on. There
here we go.
A little higher even because her name's getting, there you go. And
sorry. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, perfect. You're doing a great job. Alyssa was a guest on this show about?
Yeah, she's a marvelous faculty member. We work together with a group of about 70 scholars to put out recommendations for journalists to cover this election because we knew it would be contested, and we knew that there could be civil unrest afterwards. And so we worked hard to think about advice to give to journalists to cover that. And her book and thinking about how African Americans are using digital technology to witness is really affecting my own thinking. And I think it's a terrific book.
Absolutely. So any final thoughts? And thank you again for joining us.
It's my pleasure. I would say final thought. It's really important to just think about how what's happening now is what's supposed to happen. The states that are slow by law because they couldn't start counting, the absentee ballots early. And so nothing nefarious is happening here. It's an open and transparent process. And people who want you to think that it isn't are not to be trusted.
Well, thank you so much. And Mike, where can people find you on Twitter, of course, @ProWag? I love your Twitter handle. Anything else that you want to talk about that you're doing or that people can look up?
The work I do directing the Center for Communication and Civic Renewal at the University of Wisconsin studies how civic fracture has happened in our country and also is starting to think about ways we can start to repair those fractures. And so that's the kind of work we're up to, and we'll look forward to sharing it with you over time.
Well, please put us on your list, and I hope you'll come back and talk about that. I think, is there a more important topic apart from the pandemic, but how America comes back from all of this, especially the racial strife and the broken economy and all of that stuff. So I really look forward to hearing from you folks. Thank you so much for Mike for joining us. And everyone, please follow him. He's @ProWag on Twitter. Let's go to Mary for her book and for what she's reading.
I want to thank you and thank the other guests. I always have a great conversation, and you have the most interesting people. I learned so much, so I'll be following them both. I have not cracked it yet, but I cannot wait to read the latest. It's a bestseller, but by my former colleague and from the New York Times, Isabel Wilkerson, which is the book Cast. And that's because I think it's right for this moment, because I believe that so many people voted because the way they did, because they are anxious to keep their place in the hierarchy in the United States of America and in the world. And unfortunately, and I've talked to some folks because I'm a reporter, you might not think somebody is really in your best interest, but you feel that as long as you have a place and they put you in that place above someone else, that you feel a little more secure. And I think that somehow, and sometimes that drives how we vote, how we treat others. And so I really loved Warmth of Other Suns, and I got a chance to introduce her when she spoke about that in Charlotte. And I can't wait to read Cast because I want to understand that and how people's minds work in that way. And how it's so much a part of human nature. You're always looking how you could be above someone else or something like that. And anyway, so that's that's what I can't wait to delve into when I get past all of the election reporting and all of that. As you know, this is my fourth show today, so I'm a little bit wacky.
You're very great.
I was going to leave folks with saying, I think the future, when all of this gets decided, and as Mike said, it will get decided. We never have an election day. It's always days and weeks before it's certified, so people shouldn't get upset. But I think the future is up to us. So many people feel now that if you have a policy disagreement with someone, that it means that that person is evil or a bad person. And we've even seen studies that people now, they don't even want their kid to marry someone who disagrees politically, or they don't want to have conversations. And I'm not saying you should have those conversations because it's really tough. And if someone supports someone that you think doesn't respect your right to be here, that's really hard. But I think it's up to us what happens next in this country, no matter who ends up winning this. And it looks like it will be divided government, so we'll need more cooperation than ever.
Sure.
I want to thank you again. I want to encourage people to follow me at mcurtisnc3. Look at my work. I put everything on maryccurtis.com and listen to my podcast every other week, equal time. We look at policy and politics through a social justice lens. My last guest was the Reverend William Barber, who's amazing, and he showed his fun side. I asked him what did I not ask him I should have, and he said, "You didn't ask me my favorite song, Mary." And he sang a little bit of it, and then he said, I may have a cane, but the next time I see you post-COVID, we got to dance because I know Catholic girls can dance, Mary. And I was like, wow, even a serious civil rights icon has to be charming, right? And we've had the uncalled witness in the Clarence Thomas Anita Hill case. And so the next one up is we're going to have the mayor of Charlotte, Vi Lyles, the first African-American female mayor, who is in the middle of the 15th largest and growing city in the New South. We were supposed to host just as Milwaukee was going to be the DNC, we were going to host the RNC, but COVID put a stop to that. And she was in an ad for Joe Biden, and we're going to talk about what everything means in this battleground of North Carolina. And so please look at that.
Equal time with Mary Curtis. But just to clarify, this was Biden who didn't call her, right? He had the option of calling her.
Calling who?
You said the witness in the Anita Hill. Is that
Yes. Angela Wright. She was played by Jennifer Hudson in the TV movie, and we have a very frank discussion. She supported Joe Biden, but at that time, he did not. People said it was a he said, she said, but there were other corroborating witnesses that Joe Biden chose not to call. And she has some very, very interesting things to say about that. I'm tantalizing you.
Yes, you're doing a great job. Equal time with Mary C. Curtis. I'm going to say goodbye to Mary and to Mike. Thank you both for joining us. This was a great conversation. Bob and I will do some debrief here, but thank you both.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mary. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Great to meet you all.
Bye-bye. And thank you. That was amazing, Bob. A great conversation and very different place from where we ended last night. I think we all have hope for this country and where it could be going. I do want to just tell everyone that Lori White, who asked that great question about books, and you're not getting off without telling us about a book recommendation yourself, but I want to tell you that she'll be our guest again because we're going to have a terrific third edition of the Tarakani lecture series on First Amendment rights. She was quoting Christiane Amanpour, who was a guest on that show and therefore on that series, and therefore we were able to play the video of the interviews we did with Christiane Amanpour for the University of Rhode Island, the Harrington School of Communications and Media, and we also did the same thing with Nick Kristof and Cheryl Wu Dunn. And so the same thing is going to happen next Tuesday, November 10th. We deliberately scheduled it the Tuesday after the elections. It's going to be about trust and truth and journalism post-election. There's going to be a lot of fabulous conversation with local reporters as well as Dan Barry from the New York Times. And then that evening, Lori and I will convene and talk about what we heard and play snippets. The Tarakani Lecture Series is named after the pioneering investigative journalist Jim Tarakani, who Lori is Lori White Tarakani, whose husband was the late Jim Tarakani. And we are honored to participate. I get to do some of the questioning. So it's a very special moment to talk about First Amendment rights, especially when those of us who think we came very close with this election to losing many of our rights and expectations that this country gives all of us. So that's going to be fabulous. Next Tuesday, please join us on our 9 p.m. show. And then this will be earlier in the evening. So if you just search Tarakani Lectures, you'll get to check in here. And then you can also register the events at 4 p.m. with Dan Barry, Katie Davis, Parker Gavigan, Diana and Charles Back. So it's going to be a fabulous conversation. So please join us for that next Tuesday. And Bob, over to you.
Well, unfortunately, I didn't have it. I wasn't off camera long enough to race into the other room and grab my Kindle. Thanks to that, my Amazon Fire. I've been trying to do more reading this pandemic era, but I did the one I just took out is Al Sharpton's book, Rise Up, and that's interesting because Al was talking about his own evolution from what he was in the beginning, and even through he even criticizes the mistakes that he made, the missteps that he took. But he had a nice little vignette about meeting Donald Trump after the election and going up in the Trump Tower and trying to have a reasonable conversation with the guy. And it was no substance but all show. Trump made sure that he was seen with rich people from New York. He made sure that Al had to sit in an empty conference room surrounded by pictures of himself, of Trump, with major world figures. And it was more an intimidation show. So that's just in the beginning of Al's book, and I'm going to finish it as the week goes on. But the other one that I actually finished this summer was Ronan Farrow's Catch and Kill. It's not a political, it deals with more of the Me Too movement and the horrible things that Harvey Weinstein did to the women he encountered. But Trump and people of power were very much a part of that book. And the insights into how bullying and how heavy-handed arm twisting, legally fueled arm twisting, can render decent people into mush was eye-opening. So after all of that, what I need to do is look at more pictures like Neil sent to you and I earlier of the drawing by his 7-year-old. I need yes. I need to see more things like that for the rest of the week.
Yes, I think that will certainly help. So here we are. I think by tomorrow, when we do our show tomorrow night, we're going to try to go back to the 9 p.m. slot, partly because we need our sleep back. Though I know this is prime operating hours. Robert Anthony is just getting set to work at night. And by the way, if you haven't checked it out, he does a fabulous tech tip in my newsletter every Sunday. You can find it at sreenet.substack.com. sreenet.substack.com. Please sign up and please subscribe. But you'll also see that he has brought me back to my roots in digital and technology, rather than just all the political stuff that we were saying. And if the next time we talk, we really need to address the effect that the elections, the effect on the elections by the tech community. Even tonight, Hannity was railing against big tech, but Facebook and Twitter and other platforms are dominated by conservatives, and they really are influencing, especially now that the vote has turned out the way it is. You cannot discount the power of these social networks and what they're doing in affecting everyday discourse and understanding of who's who and what's true and what's not. It is a major problem that you and I need to talk more about publicly, because I think it's a lot of us weren't paying enough. We talk about it a lot, but not, when what I'm talking about, where the conservative says we're being censored, and you'll see 9 of the top 10 stories on Facebook, more than the New York Times, Facebook, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN combined, will be some obscure right-wing figure that you and I don't follow or know much about. Our audience may not know much about, but tens of millions of people follow these folks, and they're not all robots. Some of them are bots, of course, but the impact that a combination of the bots and Fox Media and all of this put together, it is really stunning to see.
But I have one little bit of advice before you do turn in for the night. Unfortunately, I hate picking up I hate tuning into Twitter and reading what Trump has to say. But today, just about every tweet he's made since midnight or 2 a.m. in the morning has been flagged by Twitter. If you read Trump's thread of tweets today, they must have a staff at Twitter that just reads his tweets. They are so, some of them they're not redacted, but you have to sort of click through to read them because they warn you about the possible false information from real Donald Trump. It's they must have a staff that keeps an eye open around the clock, because it just reflects the misinformation he's been sending out. Oh, there's the picture I was talking about.
Yeah, there. I had a choice between showing us more of Donald Trump's tweets or to show Neil's tweet about
Very good choice.
his seven-year-old made this. Emily, who's been a guest on our show as the youngest person who's been on the show. But one way to read Trump's Twitter feed is to go. I have to go find this. There's a feed that takes every Trump exclamation point and turns it into a question mark, and that's the feed. Is just his every tweet as is, but the exclamations turned into question marks. So when he says "I win," there'll be like a question mark instead of an exclamation. So anyway, this is we're getting punchy. It's late, but thank you so much, Bob. Everyone, please follow Bob. He is at New York Bob on Twitter. We'll be back tomorrow, 9 p.m. Eastern time, and we're very grateful to all of you. And good luck, everybody, and please stay safe. The coronavirus is not disappearing, even though that's what Trump predicted, that everyone's going to stop talking about COVID because he thought it was just something the media invented to go after him. And sadly, tens of millions of people believe crap like that. And that's why America is doing so badly when it comes to the coronavirus. Somebody showed this amazing picture of the world map, North America specifically. You see a straight line, the border between Canada and America. Right south of the border, so much coronavirus south of that border, just near Michigan and all of those places, and Canada, almost none. And that tells you the failure of America. And we're going to get back to talking more about COVID in our regular episodes as we go forward. But thank you very much, everybody. And thanks, Bob, as always, for being with us.